Okay, here we are. We're back. Burlington on the spot. I'm here with Timothy Pautler. We're going to talk about water. Today is March 2nd? 3rd. March 3rd. So how long has it been since we sat down and talked about water?
I want to say a little over a year.
A little over a year at least, right?
Yep.
I'll have to go back and look at our podcast.
Yeah, I can't remember for sure, but anyway.
I mean, I know the last one got a lot of traffic, so it's a pretty intense subject.
Yes.
And then I know since it's been a year, probably a lot's happened, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
where do you want to start? I guess, and then I'll jump in with some questions, but
well,
what's going on? Where are we at with the state of water in Eastern Colorado?
I guess I would like to start with just saying that for more than 20 years, I've been on the Plains Groundwater Management District. I have been on the RWCD since its beginning, so that's all about water.
Right.
Represented Kit Carson County for 15 years. A year ago, I was appointed by the governor to the Colorado Groundwater Commission, and now I represent the commission on the RWCD board. Steve Kramer took my place with the county.
Okay.
So I've got I wouldn't say a extensive background
I would say
in
extensive.
water, but I mean, I've been around it for a long time. I irrigated with it since 1960 when my dad put down his first well, but that well's gone, been retired, water table issues. So I'm going to let you ask your first question.
Well, no, I mean, and that takes us back. I mean, the big issue is there's not enough water. I mean, and when you were in here last time, we covered the issues we were facing. We talked about, retiring, having people do their part to retire. Since then, we've had COVID. There's been a lot. It's not like we have more water now. So, I mean, there's still the same issues that faced us then. I know for me, a lot in the media lately has been Nebraska, and I know their governor Ricketts had said he was going to try and get water from the north, right? The North Platte. I guess my question is, what is our outlook? Like, you came from a water meeting yesterday in Ray?
Well, the fee evaluation committee met yesterday, but I'd like to touch on that later.
Okay.
But to your point about there's not as much water, we've got compact issues that we're trying to address on an ongoing basis. But the South Fork Focus Zone, which you've probably heard about.
Absolutely.
Which is that carved out area along the South Fork, 80% of it's in Kit Carson County. We're trying to address that as well. The fee assessment in the RWCD went from $14.50 an acre, irrigated acre, to $30 an irrigated acre, because the estimated cost of retiring the 25,000 acres that we committed to, the state did,
right,
is going to come at a cost of, out of our fee assessment dollars alone, $55 million.
Wow.
The total price tag is going to be well over $100 million when you add in the federal portion. So it's not just the 55. Those of us that are conservative look at the big picture, and so it's over $100 million.
So elaborate on that a little bit for somebody who doesn't really understand this,
okay.
Right? Which would be me.
Well,
and lots of other people, somebody
sure.
watching this. What does that mean exactly? Where's that money going to come from?
Let me back up and start. In 2016, the state of Colorado entered an agreement with Kansas and Nebraska, and the agreement was that we would retire 25,000 acres in the South Fork Focus Zone, 10 of it by December of 24, and another 15,000 by December of 29.
Okay.
We're well on our way to the 10, and I think that's going to be achievable. The big question in my mind is whether we're going to be able to capture all 25,000 acres by the deadline with the dollars we've got. The incentive payments to retire your water are coming from both the feds and our fee assessment. That increase in fee assessment is what's going to be used to offset the expense by the district, because it's substantial. $55 million of fee assessment dollars is not chump change by any stretch. Under the CREP program, which is the USDA's FSA program, where you permanently retire your water, for good. You plant the ground back to grass, and you leave it idle for 15 years. It's conventional CRP only on irrigated land, and you're paid an irrigated rental rate. The total payout in the focus zone on those acres is $4,500 per acre over the life of the contract. Okay, if you go through the EQIP program, which is an NRCS, Natural Resources Conservation Service of USDA, it's a 5-year program, but you permanently give up the water. But the beauty of that program is you get to continue to farm it as dry land.
Oh, okay.
You do not have to plant it back
As
to
opposed
grass.
to the other where you're saying I'm going to agree to the contract of 15 years.
Yep.
Making $4,500 per acre over the life of that contract.
And the 5-year program with NRCS is it pays out at $3,500 an acre because we felt like there should be some credit to your ability to continue to farm it. I mean, there's going to be income coming from those operations. We do have a hybrid, what we call ramp. It's the again, I can't remember the actual terminology for the acronym, but basically what it is you have a well and you're willing to give up some of your acres, because let's say you don't have the best of well anymore. You're willing to give up some of your acres, and it has to be up to 15%. It has to be no less than 15% of your acres. The permit then will be reissued to reflect your new acreage. And for those acres, between NRCS, the EQIP program, and the district, we will pay $2,000 per acre.
Gotcha. So it really is a hybrid of the two, kind of meeting in the middle.
Meaning that you don't have to give up your water. You can continue, because we need all the wells in the basin to continue to generate our fee assessment dollars. The big challenge is to capture the acres voluntarily, because there's nobody got a gun to anybody's head saying you've got to do this, and but that's a challenge.
Well, so let me ask you about that. I mean, you said that we're on the way to having 10,000 done by 2024.
Right. Actually, we're setting it about 3,500 acres, but we've got a ton of interest in this program, a ton.
So what would happen if we didn't meet that? That by 2024,
we're in breach of the contract, and nobody really knows what's going to happen, including our state. I don't even know that Kansas and Nebraska know what they would
have
do.
to go to litigation or on some level, or
possibly.
But we're going to get there.
We hope we can get there.
Okay.
Yes. I mean,
I don't mean to derail us. I know what you're saying. The goal is to get there.
My confidence level in getting to the 10 is fairly optimistic. The balance, not so much.
You mean at 2029 hitting the other 15?
Yeah, but that buys us. If we hit the 2024 deadline, we buy 5 more years to figure out how we're going to do the others. Right now, we're telling people that if you think we're going to pay more in the fall of 2029 to capture those remaining acres, you're mistaken, because we think the basin is coughing up a lot of money, and those dollars probably aren't going to get any bigger, but it's all subject to change, I'm assuming. I mean, I would hope that we could capture them without – there's always that farmer out there that thinks, well, hell, if you're paying this much today, what will you pay tomorrow when you really need it? So, there's that thought process out there, but we're trying to counteract that by saying, no, this is it. The trade-off on the 2016 agreement is very important, because right now all we've talked about is what we've got to give.
Okay.
The other takeaway is that agreement gave us certainty that we would get 100% credit for our pipeline water that we dump into the North Fork. Because the North Fork, we only get 22% credit of the virgin stream flow that goes across the gauge at the state line.
From the other states.
The compact agreement, Colorado's allocation on the North Fork is only 22%. But for the water that we're putting into the North Fork right above the gauge, we get 100% credit.
Okay.
If we are in breach of this agreement, we run the risk of losing that. Well, if we have to put in 10,000 feet annually, that's kind of what we're running at right now. but we only get 22% credit. Do the math. That's a boatload of water that we'd have to put in.
Yeah.
And one, we don't have the water. And two, our pipeline wouldn't be big enough to handle it. So our desire to capture these acres is pretty intense. And I think by the dollar amounts that we're offering, we've demonstrated to the public that, yeah, it's hard to give it up emotionally, but from a dollar standpoint, I think it's a fair and equitable situation. Commodity prices right now and land values going up aren't helping that situation, but what goes up comes down. So I think over time we'll be all right, but you never know.
Well, and to this point, since 3,500 acres have successfully been retired,
Yes.
have those been mostly, which method have those been?
They've either been equip dollars going out the door, or the FSA piece of the retirement. The hybrid is just brand new.
No, but I mean, of those programs, which one are more people choosing?
They don't really have a choice, because if they got sandy textured soils that they're wanting to give
So it's
up,
dependent upon soil conditions.
right,
Okay.
Because if it's sandy and it can't be farmed,
Then that makes no sense to try. Okay.
the grass. But if you've got a good heavy piece of ground and you're retiring it, more than likely it's going to go into the EQIP program.
To where then you can farm again in
Yep.
5 years
No, you
or
from day one.
from day. Oh,
From day
okay.
one. Yep. And the fee assessment goes away. As soon as you sign the contract, you're no longer, in the beginning of the year that you don't use the water the first year.
But that's dry. Am I right about
Yes,
that?
you're
Okay.
giving up your water right, and it's not coming back. But your fee assessment from the RWCD, the $30, goes away. You will still pay irrigated property tax to the counties for the life of the contract,
Okay.
whether it's 15 or 5.
So that's the push, making sure everyone knows that there is incentive. It's important. And I remember we had the meeting, right? There was the meeting in the community center.
Right.
And I just remember coming out of that being, I guess, a little, not surprised, but just, well, maybe a little surprised that there was like a sentiment from everyone that, hey, we realize this has to happen.
Yep.
And has there been another meeting since then? Because I remember that there has been a big public meeting.
Last spring, when we kind of, as a Republican River Water Conservation District board, realized that, boys, we're running out of time and we're not capturing enough acres, and we created these new dollars that we're going to supplement to capture the acres. Before that fee assessment could go up, we had to have public meetings telling people what we were thinking to get their input, and then part of the formal process is a public hearing.
Oh boy.
In November that we held in Ray
Okay.
at our quarterly meeting. So it's not a willy-nilly deal. The statute pretty well sets a path, and we've got to follow it.
How many people were at that?
Oh, maybe 50.
How was it?
Good.
Good.
The biggest meeting of attendance was the one in Yuma at our May quarterly meeting a year ago. There was standing room only. But the sentiment was, let's get it done. Let's do whatever we got to do. You guys know the numbers. Make it happen. We don't care what the price is. Make that South Fork issue go away. There's two ways of looking at it, though. If you've got plentiful water supply, you can make that statement because you have no intention of retiring yourself. But for smaller wells, especially down in the southern end of the basin where we never had as much water,
Right.
that's an issue because the $30 per acre is probably not the fairest way to have a fee policy to collect these dollars. And this fee evaluation committee that I was at yesterday, that's a newly formed committee that's taking a look at the policy to see whether we can't come up with a more fair and equitable way. Because,
Oh, that's big.
it is.
Based on flow capability then? Is that?
Well, it's going to be, it looks like it could be a two-tiered system. And we're kind of following the lead of what utilities do as far as electric utilities. There's a service charge, if you want to call it, a facility charge, whatever you want to call it. It'll be X for every permit in the basin. And those dollars are going to go towards pipeline maintenance, administration, the debt to the pipeline, because we've all got debt that we've created in the water system down below that is reducing stream flow. That is what we're putting into the pipeline annually. It's not, we pump 650,000 acre feet plus annually in this basin from north to south, east to west. That's the total consumptive use annually. We put roughly 10,000 back in. But the 10,000 represents the impact to the three streams, the South Fork, the Rickery, and the North Fork.
Okay.
At the gauging stations, we have to replace whatever would have normally flowed through there with absence of irrigation. That's what the model does.
Okay.
There'll be an article coming out in the next few weeks in all the papers in the basin. In fact, I wrote it because I'm the pipeline technical committee chairman.
Right.
And kind of explaining to the people that the pipeline's running right now as we speak. We're putting in roughly 60 acre feet daily into the stream on the North Fork.
Okay.
To capture, I think this year our goal is 9,500 acre feet total for the year. And that covers our depletions, and the other two states are happy. And we can keep going on as we have been. The South Fork focus zone is a whole nother animal, though, because we've got to capture those acres, or we're not sure what's going to happen. So
well, and it's such a complex issue. I mean, obviously, the complexity is amazing as we're talking through this, and I would think there's this balance too, right? Because if you're a farmer and you're going to be out of water pretty soon, that's the low hanging fruit to retire.
Yep.
Right, and there's the incentives there. You're like, okay, and then if you're getting all kinds of water, you can say, okay, the fee, that makes sense. It's that middle group or the middle down towards that tier where they're hanging on, right? But they're still hanging on enough to where it's not really worth it. Is that what the battle is then?
Well, I mean, there's that's an internal battle that each individual producer has to answer of themselves. Right. Their age, the amount of water they've got left, just what do they intend to do moving forward?
Purpose.
Here's an opportunity to take the cash and be done, and not struggle with drought years and that type of thing.
Right.
Because small wells, it's hard to manage a small well when you're in the midst of a drought like we are, because it's just basically what we end up doing is wasting the water we pump because it doesn't produce anything.
Because of the drought.
It turns into an insurance claim.
Right.
But we've pumped some water. The other piece of this is a conservation discussion that we're trying to have. And I want to be very respectful about how I comment to that, but it's really a very tough subject to address. And
you're talking about environmental conservation?
Water conservation.
Well, yeah, but okay.
Because in my mind, it comes down to this. We can't undo the past. We can't back up. The damage that's been done to the aquifer is done.
Right.
What we have to ask ourselves is, what do we want to do with what's left? And I think we touched on this last time, but that's not just an irrigated ag issue. That is an issue that all of society ought to be involved in.
Yeah.
Because we've got, regardless of whether you're a ag user, domestic, livestock, commercial, it's all intertwined.
City.
Municipalities, exactly. So what do we want to do with what we've got left? And to me, conservation is the only answer, but it seems like we've become a society where, oh, you want me to conserve? What will you pay me? And to me, the old adage in conservation is well, I'm going to be better off if I conserve water for the long haul. I'll have more life expectancy out of the aquifer. But today we've become that type of society where we've got to be compensated for everything. And that makes the conversation even tougher, because we've been trying to implement the RWCD. Here's the way this works. the RWCD is trying to encourage the groundwater management districts in the basin to implement conservation. Because by statute, the RWCD does not have that ability. The groundwater management districts have that authority. We don't. But 10 years ago, 15 years ago, probably 10 years ago, the RWCD formed a subcommittee, and we call it the WPP, the Water Preservation Partnership. And it was made up of one groundwater management district members to make up this committee to try to develop a program. To date, we haven't got anything on the ground, nothing. I think the Plains District is probably one of the few districts that's actually had a public meeting and said, here's what we're thinking, what do you think? And I think you did the recording for that.
Right.
That was received probably more optimistically than what I
Which is what I was alluding to, yeah.
Yeah. But that was last spring. That was a year ago when we had this podcast. It was before or after that public meeting that the Plains hosted here.
It was before, yeah.
Okay. So we're thinking, okay, we kind of got some feedback. We got a plan. We're going to try to tailor it after what they did over in Kansas, right across the state line. Those farmers did it to themselves. They did it for themselves, I should say. They conserved the water for themselves,
Yep.
but to prolong it. Then the $30 fee assessment comes along. The increase of $15.50 per acre, irrigated acre, and everything just went silent. The discussion went silent because everybody's thinking, by golly, if I have to pay $30 per acre rather than $14.50, I got to pump all the water I can pump. And it's just really the wrong way to approach it. But so financially, that's what it takes.
No, and again, so who made the decision to go from $14.50 to $30?
The RWCD, after they analyzed.
Because we're not going to hit it unless we raise it.
Oh, we're not going to hit. We weren't gathering enough acres with the dollars that we had on the table. Between our dollars and the federal dollars, it wasn't lucrative enough. And people were having that same attitude again where, well, when you get closer to 2024, you'll come up with something better. So we decided we'd better get in front of this thing and develop these programs, which we did, and enough dollars attached to them to attract them. And I'm telling you, we've attracted a lot of interest.
Well, and when last time we were here, we talked about a survey that was being sent out.
Okay.
Right? Because that helped, and that was to retire. It was the dollar amount. And people had to, you were
That's
looking,
right?
Yep. You were looking for everyone to, hey, participate in this. And we need an actual honest assessment of what the situation is, because that's going to raise the price to retire.
Right.
How is that going?
Well, we did the survey. The RWCD sent out those surveys to everybody that's in the South Fork Focus Zone, any permit holders in the South Fork Focus Zone. We got very few back. And either they were reasonable to extremely high. And so we had to crunch those numbers a little bit, but really what we ended up doing was just looking at a whole, we looked at a whole different methods of trying to analyze the value of the water. When you take it off, what was that? So we looked at a lot of land sales, irrigated versus dry land, in the South Fork Focus Zone, and that's how we basically came up with the dollar amount.
Gotcha.
So,
and then one of the questions, and you're probably not going to like this question, but, and I'm sure this is one of the challenges, and you mentioned it, but if I'm a farmer and I'm thinking, okay, this is going to get pushed to the end, right, to 2029, I'm going to hold out, who's to say that it wouldn't be more lucrative to hold out to the very end?
That's why we're telling people right up front that it's not going to be. And people have to understand the consequences. If we can't capture those acres, we're in breach of the agreement, okay? The state is. But the state at some point is going to be forced
to step in.
To step in. And what they do to one well, they're going to do to all the wells.
Gotcha.
So if we're in breach of that, and people have to understand that ignoring it and assuming things are going to get better financially, I'm not so sure they're going to. But they all have to understand at the end, we're all responsible for making this happen. But that puts a really, I mean, that what's tough about this equation is it really puts a bullseye on those folks that are in the South Fork focus zone. They feel like they've got a bullseye on them.
And for somebody who's listening that doesn't know what that zone is, can you tell us a little bit, like what the
Sure.
geographic?
If you would follow the South Fork from the Kansas state line through Bonnie, upstream, clear to Flagler, there's a carved out area that the 3 states agreed to, and it gets bigger as it gets west, but then it finally kind of loops around, and it gets narrower as it gets up towards Bonnie.
How far south does this extend?
Oh, like for instance, the city of Burlington is not in the South Fork focus zone, but the city of Bethune is.
Oh, because it
Stratton
narrows
is.
as it goes east?
It narrows as it goes east, but let's look at it the other way. As it goes west,
It widens.
it widens.
Gotcha.
And so it goes, well, I want to say clear over into the Flagler area, and then as far south as the South Fork drainage is.
So this is why, I mean, it makes sense that you've been so involved, because you're right in the middle.
Right. Well, I'm involved for a lot of reasons.
No, but I mean, you know,
yeah.
I mean, that would make sense.
It's kind of near and dear to me. I mean, if we could capture 25,000 acres in that South Fork focus zone, I think it would prolong the life of the aquifer immensely in that area for sure. In 2006-07 timeframe, in the township that I live in, okay, 6 miles square, there was a boatload of water retired. That thing was my domestic well in 2012 had 17 feet of water left in it. The latest, I think last year's well readings that the Plains does for the state of Colorado, the water table in my township had stabilized and had come up ever so slightly.
Really?
Which is good to hear.
Yeah.
But it shows you what conservation will do. But I'd be willing to bet that in my township, 75% of the water got retired back in 2006 because we were there. We needed to do something, and a lot of people chose to do it.
What was it at in 2006? Any idea?
As far as what?
Like, because it was at 17, you know, you said.
I really don't know what it was in 2006. I could tell you this story that probably in the 50s and 60s, my domestic well had 50 to 60 feet of standing water in the column.
Well, and the reason I ask is because, so if everyone, 75% retired in 2006, is it something then it takes a decade to slow the pace and get to where, is that?
Oh, I think so.
Okay.
Yes, because if you can imagine, each well has a cone of depression. Every well has a cone of depression. Well, when in the off season, that kind of flattens out. But over time, that depression that all those wells pumped, it flattens out, but it's still kind of a cone bottom over a bigger area. Well, over time, 10 years, that cone has come up.
Oh, okay.
Out here, there's no more water than what there was in 2006, but the cone of depression has filled back up. Because water in the underground aquifer moves extremely slow, migrating. Yep.
Gotcha. So are you optimistic then at this point? I mean, obviously this, I know, and you know, you're in the middle of it, I know, because it's passion. I mean, you wouldn't have done everything you've done, served on the committees and everything if it wasn't a passion and you didn't care. What do you think? I mean, and you want to come on and send a message out, obviously, and get it out there. What's the message you want to send? I mean, you know, what do you think?
Well, I think everybody has to look into their own heart and weigh their own responsibilities to this situation. People that are in the South Fork focus zone have to genuinely look at not only themselves, but to their neighbor and society as a whole. We need to make this thing happen. And like I say, it's going to take a lot of determination on a lot of people's part. I'm hoping that enough operators with a lot of water rights consider giving up some. I hope those that have smaller wells, if they're maybe at the age to retire, they seriously give this thing a consideration because it's all voluntary. There's nothing
Now.
Now. And God forbid if we have to go to something mandatory, because we may not like that at all.
Right.
I mean,
that's a legitimate fear.
The bottom line is the basin could be shut down if we don't meet this agreement. That's the story that needs to be told, because that's the reality. I've been told that by state officials, that what happens to if you and I have an agreement and I breach it, what are you going to do?
Right.
You're going to sit still? No. You're going to do something.
And that's why you're trying to keep doing this message, be proactive. And so 3,500 acres have been retired. And when did this start?
2016.
2016. So we're 6 years in. Yep. 3,500. We have 2 years left.
Three. 2.5.
Because what is it after it? What
December 20 of 24.
Okay, yeah. So
a little over
almost 3.
Almost, yeah.
And we have twice the amount that we've done to this point in half the time.
Yep.
So that's why the message is going to have to keep getting out there.
Yep. It can't be something that people ignore, because if we don't meet the 24 deadline, we've just sped up whatever's going to happen in 29 if we don't meet the deadline by 5 years. And that's not going to be good. I don't want to put the state in that position that they have to come out here and do something, because they will be forced to do something. The compact administration, 3 states, are not going to be happy.
Do they meet like quarterly on this, or annually, or all the time?
I think they're meeting monthly, but officially they have quarterly meetings. So, yeah, it's just, it'll be interesting to see how this thing tracks. It'll be interesting to see just because of the federal programs and the way they work and the timing of them. I mean, they're not always user-friendly. In other words, when they come out with a program for a year, for the next fiscal year, it's not like, well, here's what it was last year, here's what it's going to be today. Here's what it was last year. Well, we've got an administration change. We've got this going on in Washington. We got this going on in Washington. And they won't tell us the rental rates. And it's just frustrating as heck, because producers are coming through the door talking to General Manager Deb Daniel, and she doesn't have an answer for them. And it is so tough.
Well, that's with a lot of things right now that are that way.
Yep.
And, to that point, I think the reason it's important to talk about this is a lot, right now it's impacting producers, farmers, and the rest of the other communities or whatever. A lot of times,
county,
right? But they're not really engaged, sometimes until it impacts you, right?
Oh, that's human nature,
right? Human nature. I'm like, I don't have water, I can't do this. There's restrictions, whatever that might be, and so I think it's important to get this out, because it's going to start impacting more than just producers and whatnot quickly if some things aren't done, and then. What about the Front Range? I mean, are they putting pressure on? I mean, so it's a state, so they're not even aware of this, really, or
they don't care, for one.
But shouldn't they care? Because, well,
I mean, the state
affects the whole state in some.
The state is, how do I want to say it? I don't know what the proper term is, but the stimulus dollars that came to each state via the COVID issues,
right?
Okay, and I forget what because I haven't been in on that piece of it. Senator Simpson from the Rio Grande sponsored a bill in the Senate to fund somewhere in the neighborhood of $50 million for $100 million fund for water concerns. Half of it would go to the Rio Grande Basin. Half of it would go to the Republican Basin. So that process is going through the legislature right now. It's passed all the hurdles in the Senate side. Now it's going to the House side. And I'm not sure when this House Ag Committee is going to take testimony concerning it, but we will have people there, because that could be huge in the long-term situation out here. And then how that whole process, let's say we were fortunate to get some of the money. How that process would work as far as when we would actually get the funds have to be spent. The funds have required, or the federal piece of it is required that the states taking this money have to have it spent by, I think, the end of 2024.
Yeah, and that was with the other ARP funds and the
Yep.
other type of COVID
Yep.
So stimulus that came out.
I won't say that the state isn't concerned, because we were all pleasantly surprised that it went through the Senate piece unscathed. Almost 100% unanimous in favor of it.
Well, and again, that money would be an incentive, right? And I'm guessing
We
you would
could-
incentivize again to retire.
Not more, but use those dollars maybe instead of fee assessment dollars. Be able to reduce our fee assessment.
Okay, I got you. So not more of an incentive again to bet. So we're not completely contradicting everything we just said.
Right.
So, no, I get what you're saying. So
I mean,
it would be a better way to. Okay, I see.
I mean, that's. I mean, until you get the money.
Yeah, it's not even real until.
Well, you're wasting your time trying to figure out how you're going to handle it.
Right.
Until you finally hear that, yeah, you're going to get it, and then they got to figure out how they're going to disperse it. And then we have to figure out how we're going to.
What's the timeline on that?
Well, I think we wouldn't actually get funds until sometime in 24, the way I heard it yesterday. But like I say, I'm not close enough to that situation to really. I know enough to be dangerous. Let's put it that way.
No, I got
But-
you.
but
And
I
it's a
mean,
moving target. I'm sure.
In reality, the Front Range doesn't really care
Okay.
about this area out here.
Because it doesn't impact them
It does
directly.
not impact them. Nope. And all the other waters that we have in the state all flow out.
Right. But Kansas and Nebraska care.
Well, in this closed basin, yeah, Kansas and Nebraska care. Nebraska cares about the Platte. So those waters, Ricketts rattling chains about wanting to divert water off the Platte, bring it through part of Colorado into Nebraska, certainly got people's attention.
Yeah, that was about 6 weeks ago, right?
Yep.
And what do you?
Right now, I mean, some of the accusations they made were totally false, that we're shorting Nebraska water.
Weren't they talking about going back to the pack of 47? Is that?
Well, the compact, whenever it was signed, I'm not familiar with the plat, but it did allow for a diversion out of Colorado, and the diversion point is already etched in stone. They have every right to do that, provided we're not delivering the proper amount of water. And right now, we've never shorted them. In fact, we send more water. So I'm hoping that this is Tim thinking in his own little farmer way. I'm hoping this discussion about what Nebraska has just said wakes up the people along the Front Range. And on the Platte, we figure out how to store more of that water. And we literally do not let one more drop go through the compact accounting gauge at the state line than what we're
supposed to. And that is more of an impact on the Front Range.
Well, they would have access to more water. Right now, I have no idea the state of Colorado, with their economic engine we're trying to create and trying to get more people in and more businesses and stuff, where is the water going to come from? Because when I was appointed to the Colorado Groundwater Commission, I found it kind of interesting because they had somebody do an interview with me to make sure that I wasn't a total whack job, I think. But I told him, I says, the Front Range is no different than agriculture out on the Eastern Plains. I am tickled that the state created this water plan and have something in place in the event they need it. But basically, the entire state of Colorado, if you look at the numbers, is water short.
Right.
We are water short. What does it depend on? Mother Nature. If she doesn't dump enough snowpack in the
At
mountains,
this point, it's all snowback.
well, and then precip annually.
Right.
If she's not shining on you, the Front Range is going to have the same problems Eastern Colorado has. Mother Nature has got to provide, or the best plan in the world isn't going to save them.
Yeah. Well, and then there's other droughts and there's other areas, other states that are depending on it. California, lots of them. That doesn't help.
Like I say, the Rio Grande flows out, the Colorado, the Platte. Everything goes out, and the compacts dictate how much we can use and how much we have to let go. In downstream states, the reservoirs, you've heard stories, seen the pictures. I mean, my gosh, some of those reservoirs are just scary low.
Yeah. Blue Mesa, I've seen. I mean, I don't know where it stands today, but yeah.
Not good.
Yeah, yeah.
And the forecast isn't good based on what the state engineer told us a week ago, Friday, at our commission meeting, that for the most part, the snowpack is a little above average, except for in the extreme northwest part of the state, and I believe in the southeast.
I knew the southeast was having problems. I didn't know the northwest. I always thought that they were up, but that's how it started.
But the bottom line is even with the snowpack we got in those drainages that are average or above, it's still not going to recreate the water storage that really we need to have downstream. I mean, Lake Powell.
It's getting decimated.
Oh,
yeah, Lake Powell. I mean, I
terrible.
grew up as a kid going there, and I've seen pictures, and I mean, it's not good.
And then the one that's Hoover Dam.
Yeah. Yeah, Hoover Dam Mead, right?
Yeah, and that's huge because there's so much hydroelectric power generated there.
I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, I mean,
that's not good.
If you ever been there, all the towers come out of that canyon and go in every direction, and a lot of them go through Vegas, which is a huge hotspot for electric
water
need.
Consumption. Yeah,
well,
and
water
electric need. Yeah,
electric
both.
need. I mean, it's just
it's the middle of a desert, so.
So are we.
No, I know we are. I know. Well, so what else was I? Oh, when I look back at when we made these decisions, you know, because I don't think we touched on this last time. Like, what did we get in return? I mean, why did we? Yeah, I know hindsight, right? And you might not know. I mean, honestly, but why did we do this? I mean,
the compact on the Republican was pre-irrigation, pre-high capacity well development. The technology, we didn't have it. And the agreement, I'm sure, I want to believe, being a public servant myself, I want to believe that those that were trying to make those decisions at that time, back in, I think that compact was signed in 42 because the flood was in 35. The 42 agreement between the three states, I want to believe that the people that authored that piece of legislation, if you will, did the best that they could at the time with what know-how they had. But then comes irrigation, and we start consuming boatloads of water.
Yeah, and I know that's a hard question to answer. I was just curious why we even, made the pact, but hey.
Well, I mean, why we made the pact is simple. The 35 flood took out
the whole
115 lives in the drainage.
Okay.
From Colorado into Nebraska down
because it was
into
so
Kansas.
devastating.
Oh, it was devastating. 24 inches of waterfall in about a 9-hour period.
Dang. That's
just crazy. Haven't seen anything like that again since. It would fill Bonnie up if we could, but I don't want to see the destruction. But the destruction that was caused by the 35 flood is what created this compact, because the people in the drainage, the three states, went to D.C. and said, we need help. We need flood control. And they said, fine, we'll give you flood control dollars, but you got to divvy up the water that's on the Republican.
Okay.
So from 35 to 42, they signed the compact in 42. That's how long it took them to draft this thing, and you can bet there were a lot of people that were scratching their heads going, what do we do here?
Yeah.
And
they weren't thinking 100 years in the future either, probably, and we're almost there.
They had no idea of what was in the future
right
in this basin. I think one of the issues that we had was the fact that we probably let permits out for too long. I mean, there's too many straws in the aquifer, long story short.
Okay. I like that. Yeah, that's a good image.
I mean, that's, if you will, because it just, and there's no one area that's worse than the other. I mean, it's pretty well spread out. If there was water underneath you, there's straws.
And we were probably wasteful for a long time, I would imagine.
That's a fact.
Yeah.
I mean, flood irrigation was not as, but the trouble is the more efficient you get, I made a presentation the other night to the Burlington Conservation District to in a listening session that they were having for NRCS to figure out where equip dollars were needed. And I went and made a presentation on behalf of the RWCD saying that we needed to continue to receive dollars for these well retirements. And it kind of just baffles me because I was on the Burlington Conservation District Board from 85 to 2001. Back then, we thought we were doing great with our water. There was a gentleman by the name of Wes Robbins. He came up here from Texas and was working with NRCS, and he taught us how to become more efficient with that water. But we weren't conservation-minded. We were just more efficient. And by that, I mean we learned how, okay, we won't have as much evaporation because instead of putting the water out through rainbirds on top of the sprinkler, we're going to lower that water down to within 12, 18 inches of the ground.
That makes sense.
Get it under the canopy so the evaporation factor isn't as much. And all that did was taught us that, we're more efficient, and now I can take that water and spread it out over more acres.
Oh, okay.
And that's literally, I mean, I don't, Wes has passed away. And I don't want to speak ill of the dead because he did his very best with what he knew at the time.
Sure.
And we all did the same thing. I mean, we thought we were doing the best technology that we possibly could. But in retrospect, in hindsight, looking through the rearview mirror, that spreading it out over more acres was a big mistake. And because we just kept pumping the same amount, we didn't save any water in the hole. We just figured out how to make it more beneficial on more acres.
Yeah, it wasn't about conservation.
Nope, no, but because conservation, I made the statement to that group that night, it wasn't the popular thing to do yet. And I'm just telling you from conversations that the RWCD has had amongst themselves, it still isn't, unfortunately.
Right.
I mean, it's so desperately needed because right across the state line in Nebraska and Colorado, they've implemented conservation. And yet over here we say for our fee policy, which I want to kind of go into a little bit, our fee policy is flawed because we do it on a per acre. So in other words, for up until this year, for $14.50 per acre, irrigated acre, you paid that fee. You could pump all the water you wanted up to your permitted amount. That's not conservation. And that's why this fee evaluation committee has been formed to take a look at that policy to see whether there's something that we can do. We can't technically call it conservation because we do not, even though we have conservation in our name, we can't go out and develop a conservation program of reduction across the basin like you might think we could. Because like I said earlier, that's the groundwater management districts.
Oh, okay.
That's their bailiwick. We can't do it, but we can implement a fee that would make a person think a little bit more about whether he needed that last watering or not. Because if he's being charged per acre foot,
who's on this the fee committee?
Oh, it's a pretty broad base. Goes from Jim Hadachik's on it, Josh Leachman from Sedgwick County.
Okay, so it's a
Aaron Sprague's on it from Phillips County. I'm on it, representing the commission. Kevin Penny's the chairman. He represents the Plains District. Christian Snyder, who is the representative from the Washington County Commissioners, and Stephen Meekins, who's the representative from 17 people and 17 entities. Sometimes I get a little bit screwed up.
No,
but
it's a wide swath of,
it's a wide
people
swath
that are trying to get aligned to make this more fair, but also give you more incentive not to just continue to pump.
Right. So this fee evaluation committee is really, Kevin's done a masterful job of engineering how this thing has progressed. He brought in our engineer for our first meeting. He made a presentation so that we'd have a better understanding of what we call the legacy effect, the lag effect, whatever you want to call it. Past pumping affects the stream beyond the year that you pump it. Because whatever you take out, that cone of depression, it migrates to the stream and reduces stream flow. And it takes years for this to happen. Okay? Randy Hendricks, who is the RWCD engineer, gave us a good basis for trying to substantiate, in our minds, at least on the committee's mind, that the policy we've got is flawed and a per acre foot piece of it needs to be addressed. At the second meeting, Kevin was fortunate enough to get a hold of the gentleman that runs the model for the 3 states. A genius. I mean, this guy, it's hard for him to dumb himself down so that he can talk to guys like you and me.
Gotcha.
Or at least me.
Me too. No, I'm right there with you.
And those 2 sessions gave us a better understanding of how this darn model works and what we're doing. And I touched on it earlier about the fact that the model takes into account current year pumping. I wish I had a notebook, because the notebook is a Kevin uses that, and it's perfect. You've got a 200-page notebook.
Right.
Okay. This notebook started in 1940. Okay. That's how far back the compact is calculating consumption. Okay.
Okay.
The big consumption didn't happen until the 60s.
Okay.
Where people with heavy ground could flood irrigate and they could get a permit. Then center pivots come along and the sandy textured soils took off. So all that consumption from 1940, but let's call it 1960, all that consumption each year has got to slice a page in that notebook. That makes up 81 years worth of consumptive use.
Okay.
Okay. Current year pumping, past pumping, current weather conditions for the year. Basically, all the model does, to put it in layman's terms, because I really got to dumb it down to understand it, because it is complex. The amount of water that we put into the pipeline annually is a calculation of what effect weather, current year pumping, and all those past years of pumping create on the stream. How much did it reduce it? We pump 650,000 acre feet out of the basin annually, across the whole basin. We put back in 10, roughly, right now. That's the effect that on the South Fork, the Arickaree, and the North Fork, our groundwater pumping has had on stream flow. That's what the other 2 states want, because if you can picture...
So that's their model. That's how they're coming.
That's the model. That's the model. The model is saying that what would stream flow have been absent irrigation?
Okay.
Okay. We know...
Because you have the weather stats and you can go back.
Right, and that's all part of that book. Each year, that page, that slice is calculated. I mean, they take into account if it was an extremely hot year. I mean, but the one thing that the model can't do is isolate this well. It has to do the basin.
The entire conglomerate.
I mean, they can isolate areas, but they can't isolate a single well and say, okay, this is your...
Because they don't have the data?
The model doesn't have the ability to isolate individual wells. It just can't do it.
Huh.
I mean, because basically what they do is, not sure I even want to go there, but they basically shut off Colorado in the model and run what it would be.
If it wasn't, okay.
Then they, And
I see what you're saying, because you'd almost have to, like, man, it would get so intense to do each well and then try and figure out what piece of the whole model. Okay.
And so that's part of the conversation.
And what difference would that make anyway? Because it's
in some people's mind, okay, they say, well, you guys on the heavier ground in the basin, you pumped longer. You ought to be subject to a greater cost per acre foot. If they were going to switch to per acre
areas, it would have to be areas, right? Because
that's what they're implying. Yeah. But the trouble is when you look at all the numbers of consumptive use for 81 years, it's a staggering number how much water we've taken out of the aquifer. And if there's no if there's no ability to isolate very easily certain areas, then we have to treat this as one. We're the basin. The basin as a whole has pumped in excess of 40 million acre feet out of the aquifer since 1941. I've got the data.
But so where does the math come in? Is this including those two states and their use as well, or is it just Colorado?
Well, that data it's not a secret how much we've pumped.
No, I know.
The other two states know it.
Right. But I mean, if we didn't use it, they would, right?
Well, we'd be sending them. Let's say absence irrigation. Let's try to just imagine that picture on the three tributaries we have here, absent any irrigation.
Yeah, pretend nobody's even here, and they get all that water.
By the compact standards, we're sending them probably way too much water every year.
Well, yeah, or else they'd be using all the water, and somebody even further down would have the same problem with them.
So the whole deal about the Groundwater Management Act that created all this, the legislature realized that, okay, after the 42 compact was signed, what are we going to do?
Yeah, because it's signed. I mean, it's there.
Because either we use it or it's going to migrate over into Kansas and Nebraska. So let's develop this resource to the betterment of the local economies. That was the driving force.
Okay.
But there's too many straws.
Yeah, I know, I get it. And I know.
And people are a little bit naive in the fact that they think that it was going to last forever. The state didn't think it would because they put like a 40-year time frame on it. Now they've pushed that time frame out. It's going to last longer than what they originally believed.
When did they put the 40-year time frame on it?
Day one.
What year was that, though?
Oh, I want to say probably the Groundwater Management Act, I believe, don't quote me on this, but I think it was signed in 65.
So they could see the writing on the wall.
That we were going to mine it. We were going to mine it because there's no water coming in. We use 6 to 7 gallon we use 6 to 7 gallon for every gallon to recharge. And the only recharge that we get is when a runoff event from a storm reaches the Sand Creek and can percolate back down into the aquifer. That's the only recharge we get.
Wow.
The sand hills have a massive amount of recharge. The water that falls up there, if it's a big event and the grass doesn't take it or the crops doesn't take it, it's going to go back down into the aquifer.
But here with droughts and
heavy soils
and
heavy soils.
combination.
Yeah, I mean, we're mining the aquifer by design for the betterment of our communities. But at some point, somebody's got to say, "Okay, guys,"
that's what your message is. You're going to keep getting this out, and all of the stakeholders, if you will, are going to continue to get this message and do the part to try and get what retired needs to be retired.
Irrigated ag uses 99% of the water out of the basin annually. The rest of the use is domestic life. I don't know whether that's an exact number, but I know it's better than 90%. So irrigated ag's got to look itself and say, what are we doing here? What are we going to do with what water we have left?
And then you had mentioned Deb Daniel. What role is she playing in this?
She's the general manager of the Republican River Water Conservation District. She is in charge of maintaining our business annually, and she's in charge of all these retirement programs and a myriad of other things. We've just hired another office assistant, so now we have 3 employees. Deb is the general manager. Susanna Baker is the office manager, and then there's the office assistant, which is Peyton Liming, who we just hired
recently.
After the first
and
year.
This is their probably the primary
right
focus.
Now, their goal is to try to make this whole retirement program function, take care of people's needs, people that want to retire, people that are just inquiring. They've got to go through that process with all these people, and it takes time.
How, when you had mentioned that one of the challenges for her is misinformation, lack of information. What about like the other things, like external things that are going on right now, like commodity prices, right? Going up. I mean, that stuff you're a farmer. I'm just trying to think, and I guess my other question, the bigger question is like, what's the biggest pushback you're getting
Well,
and challenges.
let's answer the commodity challenge first. In 2006 and 7, in this basin, especially on the southern end here, most of these acres came out of Kit Carson County. We retired 30,000 acres in 2 years. 30,000 acres. And we're trying to get 25 by 2029, and we're concerned. What was the situation? It was totally different. We already had small wells. They all jumped on board. They took the money and ran, and they're doing
Was the money the same then?
No, not nearly as good as it is today.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, but commodity prices were way low. Input costs were way low. I mean, it was just a whole different ball game. Today,
And that was, oh man, do my math, 16 years ago, right?
Yep. And I mean, what goes around comes around, and here we are again. In 2008, we couldn't get anybody interested in a retirement program because commodity prices went wacko again. You know, we had $5-6 corn.
Yeah, it was way up in 7 and 8.
Yeah, we had $12 wheat like we've got now, and we're facing the same thing right now. But I admire those people that are coming through the door, talking to Deb, even with commodity prices being what they are, because even if you've got a small well, $10 wheat, you can probably make that work.
So a couple questions, because I'm here to ask those, those questions, but when commodity prices were down then a couple years ago, right? Shouldn't have that meant that it would have been easier to retire?
It should have been, but people prior to our increased funding for these retirement programs, they weren't interested. It's like, that's not enough money. And long story short.
Okay, I got you. And then we retired, you said 30,000 acres.
In a 2-year time frame.
So what's the total amount of acres that had to be retired?
Well, let me back up a little bit. Nothing had to be retired. We just believed in the beginning that we needed to create, the state told us that if you
But as part of the compact, right?
Actually it was part of this final settlement stipulation. But Kansas wasn't getting their water back in the late 90s, early 2000s. So they sued Nebraska. Nebraska turned around and said, hey, we're in this together, Colorado. You're part of this too. So it went to litigation. And the Supreme Court of the United States said,
got that high, huh?
That, hey, Colorado, you think the groundwater isn't connected to streams? You're mistaken. It's connected. Fix the problem. That settlement was signed by the Supreme Court in 2002. The state, it took them a little while to figure out, oh my God, what are we going to do here? Because they were in litigation down on the Arkansas, spending millions of dollars down there trying to litigate that. And it ended up costing them, I forget, the final settlement was like $30 million, plus all the lawyer fees. And they didn't want that to happen here. So they conjured up this idea, which is a good idea, I think. Let the people solve the problem. They've kind of created the problem with our assistance,
right?
By giving out the permits. But let's see whether we can't do this and appease everybody would at least have a say in it, rather than Big Brother in Denver coming down and saying this is what's going to happen.
Okay.
They allowed us to be part of that. So
and we're there again.
We're almost there again.
We're almost there again.
Yep.
And I derailed you a little bit about the challenge. You talked about one of the challenge, but then I guess the pushback you get typically when people are having this conversation that could retire.
Well, right now there isn't a lot of pushback. It's more about will those dollars work in your operation?
Is it fair?
Is it fair and equitable? Should you really take a hard look at this if your well is on a decline? Because frankly, in 5 years, what's the aquifer going to look like in 5 years if we don't do conservation?
No, I agree.
It's going to be even worse. So a lot of them are saying, okay, I'm good. We're going to take it, help out the district, the state in meeting this 25,000 acre obligation, and we're moving on.
Now, does this change based on who's in office? At all?
No.
I know we have to have that, but I'm just wondering,
there's not a political piece of it.
No. So even if there's a green agenda there wouldn't be more funds to try. No.
No, because we're not going to get those federal funds. The federal funds are what they are, and they are what they are since 2005, 6, 7 time frame when we started using EQIP through NRCS, and then we finally got the CREP program, which is the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program through FSA. Over time, those dollars have increased, but to make it work, the district still has, on the FSA side, we still have a certain contractual obligation to those contracts that we have to meet. It's very small. NRCS is, on the other hand, to make it more palatable for people that, on the NRCS side, they pay $142 per acre.
Yep, I remember that.
For 5 years. So that's $700 roughly. Well, on a $3,500 an acre contract, guess who's making up the balance of that? The RWCD through their fee assessment. That's why it had to go to $30 to fund this thing.
So they could pay the difference.
They could pay the difference. FSAs, I don't have their, let's say it's $200 an acre is what they're paying for these CRP acres. Over the life of a 15-year contract, that's what? You do the math. We're making up the balance.
Okay.
Of the 4,500. So it's taken some serious dollars, but the basin has agreed that this is what we need to do. We got to fix this problem. We want this problem to go away as bad. I mean, you can't imagine how bad we'd like to see this problem go away, because part of the agreement, 2016 agreement, that I didn't mention earlier about what Colorado gets out of this deal.
Mm-hmm.
It's as big a deal as getting 100% credit. It's that big. And that is, right now, there's 4 tests that we have to pass on an annual basis to stay in compliance with the compact. There's a statewide test, which is an overall of all 3 tributaries, but each tributary, the North Fork, the Arickaree, and the South Fork, have to pass their own test. There has to be enough stream flow at the gauges in order to pass that test. Well, on the South Fork, we're short.
So what does that mean?
It means, okay, this is a bad analogy, but here's the amount of water that's available for Kansas and Colorado on the South Fork.
Total, and I see what you're saying. I mean, I get that we're short, but so what? I mean, so where do we go from there?
Well, let me finish this. Okay, this is Colorado's allocation.
Okay.
This is Kansas's allocation. This is the unrestricted piece.
Okay.
We're getting into this.
Oh, we're pulling into that. I got
you. We're pulling more than what we should. So to solve this problem, why the state worked with the other 2 states to come up with this 25,000 acres.
Oh, okay. I get it.
Okay, and the part that I want to mention is the fact that if we achieve the 25,000, this issue goes away.
That was my next question.
It goes away.
That issue or the whole issue?
No, just the South Fork. And whatever we're short on water on the South Fork, now we could put into the pipeline and make up that difference with the pipeline. Right now, we don't have that ability on the South Fork, and we don't have water.
Once we've retired enough, then
once we hit the 25,000, the South Fork issue goes away, and it becomes part of the statewide test. And to me, that's huge, because what we're doing here ain't good.
Well, so when that happens, let's say it happens. So we hit the mark in 2024, then we hit it in 2029.
Right.
Then what?
This goes away.
For sure?
Definitely. It's all in the language. It's already spelled out in the language that the South Fork, what they call non-impairment test, goes away. And anything we're short on the South Fork gets to be made up in the pipeline.
So no more retiring. Per the compact. I mean,
yes,
per that agreement.
Per that agreement. Yep, that's right. That's not to say that we shouldn't have continued retirements for conservation purposes.
Well, and I'm sure there would be some. It would make sense, right?
Depends on what commodity prices are doing.
Yeah, no, I get it. That's a long ways away. So, but I just
not
figure
really
out.
though. I mean, we've been in existence
you're right.
since 2004. Okay, and it's just been one hurdle after another.
Oh, I bet.
We get one balloon popped and solved, and there's 5 more up in the air. Aaron Sprague from Phillips County, he testified in front of the Senate Ag Committee, and he put it in. He's a CSU football player.
Oh yeah, he was. I remember that.
And I'm a big CU fan, so we just jawed each other.
You guys got to, I bet.
We to keep it up. But anyway, he made the comment during this Senate Ag hearing. He says, we've been in a battle, in a game with the state, but this 2016, in effect, moved the goalposts back on us. Because just staying in compliance, we could do with the pipeline. But this 25,000 acre
once
agreement
we went out of compliance.
We're not out of compliance.
No. But once we started going into the middle, into the reserve,
right,
and kicked into having to come up with the 25.
Right. Yep. There's the deal. There's you figured that out.
I got it. No, I mean, you're definitely doing a good job of explaining it to somebody who doesn't know a lot about water, which is the purpose here. I mean, you know. So going forward, what are the next big milestones you would want people to know about, or what message do you get out, in the next year? Or are we going to be doing a podcast in 2024 and going,
who knows? My crystal ball is so broke and it's so scratched because I've tried to glue it back together. It doesn't function very well.
Right. So
the rearview mirror yet is absolutely crystal clear.
Well, what is your guys' plan though? I mean, is it so you guys keep reaching out quarterly, having more meetings, keep reaching out to retire? Is there a goal by the end of 2022?
Well, the whole goal is nothing more than the 25,000. That is the goal. That is the, whatever you want to call it, the nugget that we've absolutely got to capture. I don't want to say at any cost because I'm not going to go there yet.
Right.
And I don't think as a basin we can afford much more, to be real honest with you. I mean, those $55 million out of this basin, that's a pretty good hit.
That's a big hit.
So what are we going to do if we don't? It's going to be out of our hands. It'll be out of our hands.
Okay.
Depends on whether we get funding this year through the state for these stimulus dollars or whatever you want to call them. Mm-hmm. That could play a role. There's a lot of unknowns.
Sure.
And that's what we find ourselves doing is we can only go with what the information we've got at the time. And as soon as something changes, then we've got to refocus and redirect. And it's just an ongoing battle annually. I mean, nothing remains the same. I mean, there's always something. One of the issues right now that we're trying to deal with, and I don't know that I've completely answered your question as far as challenges moving forward, but I think the South Fork Focus Zone is a big enough one, and keeping the rest of the basin in compliance. In my estimation, the South Fork is the issue today, and those people feel like they've got a target on their back. And what's funny is that it's not funny, but it's just the way human nature works. Those that are paying the fee, the $30 fee,
mm-hmm.
but don't have access to these increased retirement dollars,
mm-hmm.
they feel like they've got a target on their back too. See what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And because if you're right outside the focus zone and you're paying $30 fee, but
I do. I've talked to a couple.
Your retirement dollar capabilities is much smaller than if you're just a mile north, let's say.
Okay, and then who pays all those fees? I mean,
all the irrigated acres do.
Everywhere? I mean,
for in the entire basin within the RWCD boundary, mm-hmm. any well that's inside that boundary is going to pay for 2022 $30 per acre.
Okay,
it's a $15 million budget. It went from 7.5 to 15. Actually, it's more than that. It's closer to 16 million. But that's what we've got to generate in order to make these retirement programs work. Got to have the dollars. Got to have the dollars. So, and the basin is reluctantly said, let's make it happen, get it done. So that's where we're at right now. The challenge, there'll definitely be a challenge. If we reach this goal in 2024, the challenge will be, what are we going to do to capture the remaining 15? Because in layman's terms, that's an additional 125 pivots that we've got to take out of production.
That does put it in terms. That's a lot.
That's a lot.
Pivots.
And the majority of those are in Kit Carson County and in the Plains District. I mean, that's a big hit on the economy here. County coffers are not going to be, as those acres fall off and they go back to dry land, there's less revenue for the county. But we knew it was going to happen eventually. I mean, that's what's going to happen to the aquifer. I just hope we're smart enough to keep enough in the aquifer for domestic, livestock, commercial, and municipal.
Absolutely. Of those three, yeah.
But we know,
and then we have to work on other economic development. I mean, we're going to have to
figure something out, to figure out how to make it rain. There'd be.
I don't know. There is seed clouding or cloud seeding, right? I mean,
I said that in jest, but the biggest challenge that, in addition to the 16,000, and it's kind of controversial because there are those that say it's detracting away from the real issue, and that's the South Fork. But in order to fund this South Fork situation, the RWCD decided that it was time to take a look at their fee policy from pressures that they were receiving, me included. I mean, I'm not, Kevin Penny included.
Yeah.
Anybody with a small well included. And those constituents that we represent, we think it's only right to do right by them.
What's considered a small well?
If it's pumping, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but let's say if you're pumping less than 200 acre feet annually, you're considered a smaller well. 150 is definitely, 100 is really small, almost to the point where it needs to be retired.
So that's that spot we were talking about earlier that makes it tough, because if you're at like 200, it's not small enough to retire, but then you're in a bad spot.
You're in a bad spot. And the tougher thing is if you've got a boatload of water and you're inside that focus zone, you're really not interested, because commodity prices the way they are right now, why would you do that? I mean,
you wouldn't. Let's just be honest.
Yeah, I mean, human nature being what it is. But this fee evaluation committee that Kevin's chairing is
I gotcha, could make a difference.
Trying to make these dollars that we're requiring through our fee assessment to make it as fair and equitable to all the producers, all the permits. Because like right now, it's not really, if you look at the numbers, and I've certainly looked at a lot of numbers, wells that are pumping that less than 200 acre feet, 180, 150, 100, but they're still paying that flat fee of $30 an acre. Their cost per acre foot of water is
way higher than somebody else.
Oh my gosh, like 3-4 times higher. So we're trying to figure out a way to even that out. Pay for what you use. Where else in this world?
Why wouldn't you? I mean, why didn't it start out that way?
We didn't have meters. We had no way of quantifying the amount of water that was coming out of each. Yeah, that too. But that's that's the reality of it.
Well, and then
we've had.
So you just kind of came to this realization late because you're looking at it and said, "Hey, this could be a solution, or it could help."
The meters were mandatory by the state.
When did that happen?
I think they had to be final. It was in the early decade of 2010 moving forward.
So we're not talking long at all. I mean, no wonder it hasn't.
The state is finally using the meter data annually in the compact administration piece for the figuring out how much water we have to put into the pipeline. They've been using that data from the meters since 2016.
Not long at all. Okay.
No,
I mean,
6
that
years.
sheds light.
6 years.
And now you guys are saying, let's be proactive. Let's help that person that's pumping 200 per acre.
But the trouble is we've got people that pump 400 and 500 and 600 acre feet annually.
And so you think they're going to
They don't really want to move. They like it just the way it is.
Well, but so they wouldn't. I mean, you would just lower it for the people, right? Or are you suggesting you're going to keep it at 30 and then go up on
it's
them?
It's going to be what
Well, I guess you would have to, right? Or else you'd be losing out.
It's all budget driven, okay? We need 15 million, 16 million annually. So
I get it.
The piece of it that we want to use, what we're calling a structure fee, very much like a a facility charge the electric people
Right.
have.
On usage.
You pay a structure fee. Everybody pays that same fee, regardless of whether you've got a 2,000 gallon well or you've got one that's only pumping 150 gallon. Everybody, because that gives you the right to use that well.
Then in addition, based on usage.
Then the balance of our budget needs would be on a per acre foot basis. So yesterday we came up with a split that the facility charge, at least in the beginning, would be approximately 40% of your total fee. 40 for the facility, 60 of it would be on a per acre foot basis. The committee has done a lot of soul searching and thinking about this, and we think we've finally come up with something that we're ready to unveil to the board at least. And if they buy off on it, and I'm telling you though, there are opponents to this just
And that was my next question.
Outspoken.
So the committees come up with this. You take it to the board. How big is the board?
17 members.
That's 17. Okay.
Okay, there's 8 groundwater management district representatives, 8 counties represented, and I represent the Colorado Groundwater Commission for the 17th member.
And then what is it? Just have to be a majority to pass, or?
Yes, we need 9 votes.
So 9 votes.
Yep.
And then if you get those 9, okay. If you get those 9 votes, then that's when it rolls out.
If we get the 9 votes among the board, then we go to this public process where we start saying, this is what we're considering.
You have to have a public hearing, get feedback.
Well, we'll have public meetings to unveil the thing, just like we did when a year ago at this time we were starting. What's kind of ironic is a year ago at this time when we were really crashing the numbers for this South Fork Focus Zone requirement, the original idea was we're going to leave the 1450 intact. The additional funds are all going to be on a per acre foot basis. It's like, okay, that's a step in the right direction. So that you just don't have an open-ended ability to pump all the water up to your permitted amount. Because I think per acre foot is going to create a certain amount of conservation. I'm not touting it as being the cure-all.
Right.
What I'm touting is it's way more fair. If you're pumping 400 acre feet or however many acre feet you're pumping, that is directly responsible for how much water we have to put into the pipeline. It's all acre feet.
Okay.
And it's all compact related. That's our job. That is the policy that we need to fix, because what we've got now is broken.
And it's tough, right? Because no matter what you do, someone's unhappy.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Especially if you're going to have to pay more.
Right.
About 55% of the people
But
in the
either
basin
way,
are
somebody's
benefit.
paying more. Like either way, somebody's going to think they're paying more than their fair share.
Well, right now, the people with the small wells,
I know,
with the acreage per acre flat fee, they think they're being unfairly
That's
treated.
what I'm saying.
So, I mean, it's a catch-22.
No, it is. It's just like anything.
Yep.
Yeah, and so it all came full circle for me.
Well,
in the last 5 minutes. What a challenge.
Oh, it is. I mean, I don't know which is tougher to talk about, the fee assessment piece or the conservation piece, because both of them
They're both
literally
like hand in hand, though.
Literally like herding cats, because nobody wants to give up anything from a conservation standpoint, and from a fee evaluation standpoint, they don't want to pay any more.
So who came up with this idea to go to the board? Just a couple of you guys, or Kevin, or?
Well, Kevin's been a big proponent that we needed. As soon as the meters came on, Kevin's been saying, hey, this fee policy we've got, and he's been very diligent about it. And when he was just doing it in the beginning as a concerned citizen, coming to our board meeting saying that, hey, this fee policy ain't working for me.
Sure.
And then he was appointed Plains Groundwater Management District. He's not on the Plains Groundwater Management District Board, but he was appointed by that board to represent them on the RWCD board.
Okay.
Which there was a learning curve. Like
Sure.
anybody that comes onto this board, it's just like the first meetings are like being fed with a fire hose. I mean, just literally, they're just.
I can only imagine.
Oh, it's crazy.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I mean, even, I've been around. I'm one of the few guys that are stupid enough to stick around, but I've learned so much since 2004 and the amount of knowledge that I've got when I can remember it.
Well, and
it's crazy.
This stuff is so important. I mean, it's not just like the most exciting topic, but I mean, it's so important, you know?
Well,
I mean, what we're talking
To
about.
me, it is exciting.
No, but you know, to the general public,
Right.
right? I mean,
Well, they go to the tap, the water's there.
right. Until
It's
it
no big
isn't.
deal. Till it isn't. It's just like in any of these discussions that we have about conservation, nobody cares about their neighbor until they run out. Then it's like the sky's falling.
We got to do something.
What are you
Right.
going to do for me? And
Right.
it's, I mean, the little town of Siebert ran out of water. Nobody did anything. So, I mean, that's just human nature.
You know, because now that I totally grasped this all, you know, it only took an hour and a half or, yeah, about that.
Seriously? It's
yeah.
been an hour. Oh, my
Yeah,
God.
hour and a half. So this next step then, I mean, does the board know this? And you just got it, because you said you're going to take it to the board. So I'm guessing there's a group of you that have put this together now. You're unveiling all
This
17.
committee has been working on
The
this
committee, sorry.
since January.
So it's like a subcommittee or of the board.
Well,
Like
it's gonna if it becomes, if we make this switch to per acre foot become a reality, I got a feeling that committee is going to be a permanent fixture, because them along with the budget committee are going to be intertwined. It's too much for the budget committee to handle. The fee assessment people don't want to deal with the budget, although there's interaction with both. Some people are on both committees. But I mean, at some point annually, when we have our budget hearing annually for our budget,
mm-hmm.
those two committees are going to have to figure out, okay, here's our financial requirement. Fee committee, how are you going to generate it?
But when would this vote take place? Like, so we're talking about this on the podcast. I mean, this podcast is going out in like 3 or 4 days.
Well,
So, I mean, if somebody heard this, it wouldn't be a shock.
Who knows when we'll actually get a favorable vote, if we get a favorable vote to do a fee change.
So if you took the vote today, you don't know if it would be 9 to 8.
Don't know. Don't have any idea.
Can you take a poll and find out? Or
No, and I'm not going to venture to say. We're getting closer. I mean, in 2020, we did this same exercise. We called it a split fee. Half of it was going to be per acre, half of it was going to be per acre foot. One thing we learned, we did that all through the budget committee. Aaron Sprague is the chairman of that, and he's now on this fee evaluation committee. And he says one thing that he says I learned was we did it way too fast. The board has to have a chance to digest and understand, because the committee totally understands.
what is way too fast, though? I mean, because we're up against it. I mean, it's 2 years and you have to retire 10,000.
Well, the retirement piece, it's intertwined, but it's not directly affecting. Because we're gonna collect dollars. Either it's per acre. Okay,
Okay,
the
I see what you're
fee.
saying. They're not completely codependent. So
No.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, it's just a matter of moving forward, as we need to continue to collect these dollars to capture the $55 million. We're just trying to make that
To be
process
able
more
to retire,
fair,
right.
fair and equitable across the basin. And we think paying for what you use should be a component of that fee structure.
But then let's be honest. I mean, you're going against some of the big users. I mean, or the big, that's going to be, yeah.
Yep, that's the long and short of it all right there. I mean, there's the debate. But I go back to what Kevin Ryan said, I told you before we started the podcast. In a public setting where there was a lot of controversy about water down in the Southern High Plains at Springfield in November, he makes the statement that he says, I understand where everybody's coming from, both sides, but even in the division, there's unity because you're all passionate about water. We'll get there. It's just going to take a little while. And that's what I think we learned 2 years ago, that it takes longer. You can't just force this down people's throats. You've got to be patient. And for those that want it to happen yesterday, that's not reality. It's going to take time. So there it
Okay. Awesome. Well, thanks for coming in. I mean, that's a lot to digest. And, you know, I'm going to keep on the water. I'm going to reach out. As you know, I'm not going to say it now, but I got some other water podcasts coming up.
Yep.
And based on that, I would imagine we'll probably have you back sooner rather than later.
Doesn't
I don't think
matter.
it'll be a year.
I would just close with this comment.
Okay.
It's a statement I've used several times. What does the basin want to do with the water we have left? That's the message I want to leave, because I want society to be engaged in this conversation as we move forward. It's not just an irrigated ag issue. So people with houses out in the country, new couples that just setting down roots for the first time.
Yeah.
They've got a 30-year note and they've got a 30-year expectation of a water supply. They ought to be at the table having this discussion about what we're going to do with what we have left.
Okay. It's a good way to end it.
Okay.
Tim Pautler, thanks for coming in, bud.
You bet.
All right.
Thank you.
You bet.